Ari Lewis Show.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Ari Lewis Show on Israel Sports and News Radio. Thank you for joining us. At any time, you can email the program, arilewishow@hotmail.com, and you can email the station, Israel Sports News Radio @gmail.com. NBA All-Star Game upon us. A lot of interesting backstories and a lot of interesting side stories. On the line right now is our NBA expert back to the program, the founder of OMG Poetry, Joe Robbins. Joe, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much, Ari. Great to be here as always.
Yes, indeed. So the elephant in the room, especially from the Israeli perspective, Cavs have the first seed in the East. That was done mostly by David Blatt. David Blatt's been fired. Tyronn Lue made a joke, I think, saying that David Blatt should coach the All-Star game. Obviously, that's not going to happen, but that's kind of strange that the number one team going in the All-Star game has a pretty new coach. Lue at this point 5-2 with the Cavs, so address that situation.
Yeah, it's really an unprecedented situation, historic situation. Never before had a coach been fired at that point in the season with that good of a record. And that includes, coaches who were fired because of scandals, that type of thing, which obviously wasn't the case here in terms of legal trouble or anything like that would lead to the immediate dismissal of a coach. Never in history had a coach had a higher winning percentage and been fired at that point in the season. And in addition to that, it's even more historic when you take into account that the fact that David Blatt led the Cavs to the NBA Finals last season. So not only had he led the team to the finals in his first season and posted the best record in the conference, and at the time the third best record in the NBA in his second season, he was also, by all estimations, on his way back to a second NBA Finals. So it really is, it was a shock to the basketball world. Like you mentioned, it was definitely a shock to the Jewish world and to Israel. Completely unexpected by most in the basketball world. There were a lot of rumblings and people had been talking about some issues in the locker room and maybe Blatt not being the right fit in terms of that. But even the people who said that they thought Blatt was doomed from the start because he was hired before Cleveland brought LeBron James back as a free agent. So even those people who said he didn't have a chance because LeBron wasn't the one who picked him to be his head coach, even they were shocked by the timing. Yes, there was a blowout loss to the Golden State Warriors. There had been the big loss to the Spurs. So basically all the teams that the Cavs would potentially be competing against in the Western Conference for the NBA title again this year. But even with that, and the Cavaliers officially said that loss to the Warriors wasn't the reason, even though it was the game that preceded it. But even with that, the timing was shocking, so close to the All-Star break with the team doing so well.
And LeBron James the next day said, I found out about this like everyone else when I got in the locker room. I don't think anyone believes that. What I want to know from your perspective, how much was he involved with the decision? General management claims none at all. Again, I don't buy that. Is it a situation where they alert him and he says, yeah, you have my go-ahead? Is it he puts pressure on them and they give in? What do you think happened exactly between James and the Cavaliers management?
I think it was the first scenario you described. I agree completely. I don't believe for a second that LeBron didn't know. He's LeBron James. He has an opt-out clause in his contract. You want him to stay. You want him to lead you to a title. You're not going to make any personnel move in terms of a coach, and even in terms of some of the players. We know he was a big proponent of the trade that brought in Mozgov and J.R. Smith and Iman Shumpert last season. So nothing happens without LeBron James, but I don't think it was orchestrated by him. I think that part is true. I think what probably happened is management, David Griffin, the Cavaliers general manager, who is an excellent basketball mind, respected as one of the top basketball executives in the NBA. I think he made the decision. He convinced ownership. I'm sure with the caveat, as long as LeBron signs off on it. And then he went to LeBron and said, we're making this change. And I don't even think necessarily LeBron said, go ahead and make this change. I assume, this is obviously all speculation and hearsay, but my personal take is that LeBron probably didn't say anything. It was no answer was the answer. They said, we're thinking about doing this. LeBron kept quiet, and that was the green light for them to go ahead and do it. LeBron is very close with current coach Tyronn Lue, as so many of the other players are. I also don't think that Tyronn Lue was positioning himself for the job. We know the backstory that he was the finalist to be hired before they brought Blatt in, but Lue was a top assistant. I don't think he was jockeying for the job or using back channels to say, get rid of Blatt, give me the job. But I do think that sense was kind of there in the organization that Griffin wasn't so happy with the job that Blatt was doing, obviously not in terms of wins and losses, but in terms of how the team was playing, how Kevin Love is being utilized, and so he decided to make the change, got Dan Gilbert, Cavs owner, on board. LeBron signed off on it, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Indeed, this is the Ari Lewis Show on Israel Sports News Radio, joined by Joe Robbins, breaking down the NBA All-Star Game and the situation in Cleveland. A couple of weird comments when you look back in the past, and then even a day or two after David Blatt was fired, there was that famous story where Blatt did not call LeBron's number in the game against the Bulls. LeBron ripped at the play, made the shot, which is common among star players. What was uncommon was he bragged about it to the media and admitted he ripped up the plays. And it appeared that a lot of the players did not have respect for David Blatt, especially towards the end. They kept going to Tyronn Lue. I want to know your thoughts about that. You know, in hindsight, it kind of looks like the writing was on the wall, even though there were, like you said, there were rumblings. We didn't know how bad it was. But again, in hindsight, it looks like it was only a matter of time for David Blatt.
Yeah, definitely, which is unfortunate because he is a fantastic coach. He did do a great job with the Cavaliers, and we can, I know we'll get to his career prospects in the NBA soon, but in terms of that, I agree. I think the rumbling was there, the timing was shocking, but when you put it all together, the firing itself wasn't shocking. Blatt, it seemed, had trouble adjusting to the NBA players in terms of dealing with superstars for the first time. And that's not to say that he wasn't able to do it and he can't do it in the future, but I think the biggest disconnect in the Cleveland locker room was Blatt, and this has all come out again, like you mentioned, since the firing, and when pieced together, makes sense and makes it the writing on the wall, makes us see that it really was there and bigger, if you will, than we thought. But Blatt was timid in film review sessions. It's come out he was afraid to call out LeBron and other star players for making mistakes, and Lue would have to step in and do that sometimes. And so I think, Blatt, I remember when he was first hired, he had a great quote relating to finding out that he was getting Kevin Love and LeBron James, and how, of course, any coach would be thrilled. And it was true. He got a great team, and he's a great coach, and he was able to coach it into the NBA Finals. But it also wasn't the team that he was hired to coach. He was hired to coach a young core of players, a rebuilding team. He was a player development guy. He was an offensive wizard, and he was brought in to do that. And then the whole equation changed when Kevin Love and LeBron James came. So, in some regards, it was a gift and a curse being gifted two of the best players in the NBA. A gift because, obviously, like you said, what coach wouldn't want one of the all-time greats in LeBron James and an all-star in Kevin Love? On the other hand, because it wasn't the situation he thought he was coming into, it looks like that's where the disconnect was, and that ultimately played a role in him being replaced by Tyronn Lue, who has a great connection with the players, who was an NBA player himself, for 10 seasons, and who has been an assistant coach in the NBA for years. And it was made pretty apparent when the Cavaliers did not hire Lue, did not promote him to interim head coach. The day they announced that Blatt had been fired, they signed Lue to a 3-year extension. So it was clear that the organization thinks he's the answer. The players relate well to him. And it'll be interesting to see how he does as the season progresses. They're 6-1 under him right now. The one loss was a surprising loss to the Hornets, but you're not going to win every game. But in terms of winning percentage, yes, 6-1 is better than what Blatt had, but there's no reason to think that David Blatt wouldn't have coached them to the same 6-1 record. So I think we need a bigger sample size. We need to see how Lue does in the playoffs. I think Lue will be a very good coach. He'll turn into that. I think Blatt is a great coach already. But the writing on the wall that was there definitely turned out to be true, and makes sense in hindsight. It just kind of blindsided us, so to speak, when the announcement was made on that Friday afternoon, Shabbos time already in Israel.
And as they say, if you want to bury a story in the media, release it Friday afternoon. So they were very calculated their decision. No doubt about that. This is the Ari Lewis Show on Israel Sports News Radio, joined by Joe Robbins talking NBA All-Star, departure of David Blatt. Pretty interesting to see a lot of NBA coaches come out in support of David Blatt. Greg Popovich, in particular, very funny. As usual, Spurs suffered a blowout loss a few days after Blatt was fired, and he made a joke. Thank God my general manager was not here, otherwise I would have been fired too. So that's pretty rare. You usually don't see coaches come out and support a coach when he gets fired, and a lot of people are of the opinion he'll have a job somewhere in the NBA. I'm not sure when, but at some point. What do you think? Where's David Blatt's next stop? What makes best sense for him?
So in terms of the first point, definitely it was unprecedented. I don't remember seeing at the professional level, maybe even in the college ranks, although college you've seen it with some more revered coaches, but I don't remember seeing at the professional level so many head coaches and other general managers come out and question the firing of another coach, and not only question it, but you mentioned Pop's comments. Rick Carlisle, head coach of the Mavericks, he will be a Hall of Fame coach one day. He's one of the greatest coaches in the NBA. He came out and he spoke his mind freely, saying he was against it, saying he was shocked it shouldn't have happened. You had a lot of ESPN commentators calling games over the next few days. Again, these are people paid by ESPN, who we know is a great network at covering sports, but also probably one of the most biased networks towards superstars, and LeBron James in particular. You had the ESPN color guys, announcers, commentators, when it was out of game situations, all saying how shocked they were. Doug Collins, former great NBA coach, spoke a lot on it. So really it was so interesting to see, and really spoke to how shocking the move was, that all of the coaches rallied around Blatt. In terms of the next job for him, a lot of people said, no way he gets a job in the NBA, no way he gets one this year. I believe that he will be a head coach at the start of the next season. I think, like I referenced a little earlier, Blatt was brought in to be a player development guy, to take a young core, to mold it, bring in some veterans who weren't stars, and build a team in Cleveland around superstar Kyrie Irving, and help with some of the other older players they had, but bring in new players, be there for a few years, draft well, get Cleveland to a point where it didn't need a LeBron James, although it would obviously need other pieces. It didn't need a LeBron James to be a contender. That all changed, obviously, when LeBron and Kevin Love and everyone else came in, but that was what he was hired to do. And I look around the NBA now, and there are 3 markets I see who have young cores, a ton of cap space, will have very high draft picks, and that's the perfect situation for Blatt. We saw him win with the Maccabi Tel Aviv team that was a pretty, nothing against the players, but that roster was not like the other Maccabi Tel Aviv championship rosters. It was a shock that they won it all. Not so shocking by the time it got there because of how well they had played, but at the beginning of the season, people in the Israeli media were talking about how the team might not even make the EuroLeague competition rounds, let alone win it all. He led the Russian national team, which really had no superstars at that point, to a bronze medal in the Olympics. I mean, he's excelled everywhere he's gone at building and nourishing that talent. And so I look around the NBA, and the 3 teams that I see now after the firing of Jeff Hornacek in Phoenix are the Phoenix Suns, the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the Los Angeles Lakers. If you're talking about places to live, I would say go to Phoenix or LA, but obviously we're talking about the whole package. No offense to Minnesota. Wasn't made for the snow, but Minnesota with their incredible young core. You look at Karl Anthony Towns, would be a shoo-in for Rookie of the Year if it wasn't for Kristaps Porzingis, but Karl Anthony Towns is doing things that the NBA hasn't seen by a rookie in 30 and 40 years. He's an incredible big man. They have Zach LaVine. They have all these great players that Flip Saunders, may his memory be a blessing, cultivated for the team. They're going to have a high draft pick again this year because even though they're exciting, they're not a good team. So that's a great team. Great team for Blatt, I should say. The Los Angeles Lakers, with Kobe Bryant gone, will have all that cap space. They have number 2 pick in last year's draft, D'Angelo Russell. They have top 10 pick in the year before, Julius Randle. They've got Jordan Clarkson, who is pretty unheralded, was a second-round pick, but was not expected to contribute the way he has. He's been great, averaging over 15 points a game, and not just because he's getting bigger minutes than he would. So they've got a good young core that they can build around. And then the Phoenix Suns, Devin Booker, extremely exciting rookie out of Kentucky, first-round pick last year. Eric Bledsoe, all-star point guard, cap room more young guys, more people coming in. So those are three clubs that I think are perfectly suited for David Blatt. The other person in the equation is Luke Walton. We know him well from Arizona, from U of A, and then he was the interim coach this year for the Golden State Warriors, led them to a historic start to the season in Coach Steve Kerr's absence, and everyone is saying Luke Walton will be getting his first head coaching job next year. The reason that comes into play is, in addition to those being the three open jobs, Luke Walton won championships with the Lakers, is very close with management there. He also played his college ball in Arizona, has ties to the Phoenix Suns from when Steve Kerr was general manager there, was very close with Warriors associate head coach Alvin Gentry, who was the head coach of the Phoenix Suns. So I think Blatt and Walton will both be competing for the same jobs. Having said that, there are more than enough jobs to go around for a great seasoned coach like Blatt and a great up-and-coming coach like Walton. So I think David Blatt will end up in the NBA, will have a head coaching job next year. The only way I don't see him as the head coach is if he decides he wants a year as an associate head coach to gain some more experience and get integrated into the NBA life again. I don't think he needs it, but were he to decide he wanted to go that route and be out of the spotlight, so to speak, for another season where it's not all on him, he was offered the associate head coach job by Steve Kerr last season to coach the Warriors. Blatt became the Cavaliers head coach because that offer was too good to pass up. And that was when Alvin Gentry was brought in as associate head coach. But if Luke Walton does go and take on another job, that would be a great destination for Blatt to return as associate head coach with his close friend Steve Kerr. I do think, though, that Blatt will take another head coaching job. He should. He's ready for it. If he goes to Phoenix, Los Angeles, or the Minnesota Timberwolves, those are all places where he'll have a few years to grow the players. They aren't win-now places. They won't be expected to get to the playoffs in the first or second year. He'll have some chance to grow with those clubs and grow those players and show that he can turn an NBA club into a winner from the ground up like he did in the Euro League and with the Russian national team.
Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show on Israel Sports News Radio, joined by Joe Roberts, talking about the NBA All-Star Game, a couple stories in the behind the scenes, if you will. Now, Kobe Bryant is the lead leaguer in All-Star voting. Not such a surprise because it is his last year, although not technically deserving, if you will, but this is not unprecedented. MJ in his final year, 2003, was a starter even though he quote-unquote didn't deserve it. Magic in 92, a starter even though he barely played in the NBA that season. What are your thoughts? My thoughts, it's an exhibition game. There's no defense. Players don't care about it anyway. On the other hand, he has taken a spot of a guy who probably deserves to be there. I don't know if Kobe's even a top 100 player in the NBA at this point. So what are your thoughts about the Black Mamba being an all-star starter in the All-Star Game?
I'm okay with it. It's a legacy thing, like you said, and Kobe's earned it. He's one of the greatest players of all time. He holds a ton of records. He's meant so much to the Lakers, to the league, and the fans want to see him go out starting. There's always the debate about fan voting, and it is tough that it took the starting spot away from another young star who would have gotten it. Having said that, the key words there are young and star. While nothing is guaranteed, as we know in professional sports, chances are the two players who are vying for that spot in terms of worthiness of it, Kawhi Leonard and Draymond Green, who are both still all-stars, chances are they'll be all-star starters next year. So while it does take away that spot, Kobe has more than earned it. If there wasn't a precedent for it, I would have more of an issue with it. But like you mentioned, Magic, Michael Jordan, fans want to see Kobe. He deserves the limelight for his last one. And even the other players, they all talk about how special the All-Star game is. We see it in every sport, with the exception of the Pro Bowl now because nobody cares about it. But even back in the day with the Pro Bowl, you would see guys trading their helmets, getting their helmet autographed by every other player. At the Home Run Derby, we see guys taking pictures with each other, trading their gear, autographing their kids' stuff. And definitely we see it in the NBA All-Star game with trading their jerseys, the shoes they wore in the game, getting them signed. So for the other players, even when you've got guys who have been doing it almost as long as Kobe has, when you've got some of the great older all-stars, they want to be there for Kobe's last hurrah, and definitely the young stars do. So I think it's going to be great for the game in terms of that. It's an offensive game with no defense, like you mentioned. Kobe's started, he had a 38-point game with 7 threes a few nights ago. He's starting to find his shot a little bit. He doesn't have to play a lot of minutes. He doesn't have to change the face of the game on the court, but just being able to change the face of the game by being there and by getting all the pomp and circumstance and all the honors that are coming his way and that he's deserving of. As an NBA fan, it's worth it for him to be an all-star for that reason. It's the end of an era. It's the end of one of the greatest players ever to play the game, since we know he's retiring and this is his final season. So it's great that he gets to go out an all-star, and it should be a lot of fun seeing him get all of the awards side by side with so many of the great, energetic, young, true superstars that the league has coming up through the pipeline who are joining Kobe as an all-star, even if one of them has to be a reserve because Kobe took that starting spot.
This is one of those things. The event is more important than the game itself, and the players, like you said, want to participate in that event and hang out with Kobe one last time. Last question, Joe, before we let you go. Want to get your thoughts on some strange comments from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the Charles Barkley second. Kareem said that Dirk was not a dominant player and a one-trick pony. Kind of weird thing to say for a guy that has more career points than Shaquille O'Neal. I want to add also an MVP, champion, the list goes on of Dirk Nowitzki's credentials and resume. So I think he's a little more of a one-trick pony. Obviously, shooting is his best talent, but a pretty good offensive rebounder, a pretty good team player. So what are your thoughts about the comments of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar regarding Dirk Nowitzki?
Yeah, it was puzzling, if for no other reason than I'm assuming the one-trick pony. Regardless of what Kareem said, he was kind of referring to Dirk's incredible step-back, one-foot fadeaway that he's trademarked, and we've seen other players try to emulate, even against Dirk this season, to try and, pay a little homage to Dirk. If anyone's a one-trick pony, it's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar with the skyhook, if we're talking in those terms, right? I mean, Dirk invented that move. Kareem invented that move. So it's kind of weird in terms of that. Now, you and I both know that obviously Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was not a one-trick pony, just like Dirk Nowitzki is not a one-trick pony. Dirk does a ton of stuff, like you mentioned. I remember early in his career, I used to joke and kind of give it to Mavs fans a little bit. I used to call him Irk because he didn't have the D. Right? The knock against Nowitzki was he couldn't play defense. Well, he turned himself into a defender. He worked on that part of his game as a young player who really was drafted because of his offensive skills. He became a defensive player. He does a lot. So definitely, I think it's head-scratching, puzzling for him to be called the one-trick pony. And in terms of the dominance, was he dominant like a traditional 7-footer? No, because he wasn't a traditional 7-footer. I think we could say that KG also wasn't dominant like a traditional 7-footer because Garnett was the first true shooting point guard, power forward, who extended defenses with his mid-range jump shot and mix of athleticism the way he did. So, I mean, saying that Dirk wasn't dominant, a ton of other players in the league have said throughout the years that they would want Dirk on their team to take the last second shot. So I guess it's a question of how you measure dominance, but what he's done, Dirk Nowitzki, obviously a first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the greatest scorers in history, one of the greatest teammates and team players in history, had a team top 5 in wins in NBA history, won a championship, MVP caliber player. He's a great one. I'm not sure why Kareem decided to say what he did. I'm not surprised that Charles Barkley latched onto it because that's kind of what he does, and that's not disrespectful to Charles. If anything, it's respectful for sharing. It's respect for him for sharing his opinion, while saying that a lot of the times Charles Barkley's opinion happens to be wrong. So I think Dirk also deserves nothing but the best in what is likely to be his final season. It's been a pleasure seeing him play, and he should only be receiving accolades, especially from the NBA greats, and no criticism or knocks against the Hall of Fame career he's had.
Well, you don't want to knock Charles Barkley. I will. I'm still upset at the way he left Phoenix and that he didn't work out so hard and we don't have any championships. But anyways, that's my personal take. Dirk Nowitzki, 6th all-time in scoring, more points than Shaquille O'Neal, a few thousand points behind Wilt Chamberlain. Must have done something right to get in that category. This is another episode of the Ari Lewis Show on Israel Sports News Radio. My guest has been Joe Robbins, founder of OMG Poetry. You can find Joe on Facebook. Go to OMG Poetry, type that in Facebook, learn more about it. Joe, thanks for being on the show today, and enjoy the All-Star Game and all its festivities.
Thank you, Ari. You too. Looking forward to talking more soon.
Yes, indeed, and good luck to Steph Curry in the three-point shootout.
Thank you.
All right, be well, my friend. We'll talk soon, and thank you, everyone, for listening. Be well, God bless, and shalom from Israel.